All right, so we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to start off playing a game. So if you look at your insert, I made an insert for you this morning, and at the top you'll see two columns listed 1 through 5. What I've done here is I've actually combined two of our youth lessons together into one, which I think it's really good for you all to see some and hear some of the lessons and the discussions that our young people are having, our students are having up Sundays and Wednesday nights. But also I think it's good for our students to realize that what we're talking about is very applicable to everyone. Everyone can take something away from these messages. So what we're going to do first, we're going to play a game. It's actually the same kind of warm-up game that we did before a lesson. So we actually had volunteers come forward, and they would draw a picture or an object out of a hat, and then they had to build a food chain hierarchy, and without knowing what else was in the bag. And we had to see how well we could put this together. So we're actually going to do the same order that the students drew the objects out of the hat. And so if you look at your columns, number 1, there's going to be the top of the food chain. So say if the first image, you think that that's going to go at the top of the food chain, you would just write down what the image is, or there's actually a letter corresponding with the picture. So the first picture will be A, so you could just write an A there if you want. Or if you think it goes to the bottom of the food chain, you'd put that at a 5. Okay? Makes sense? All right, let's see what we got here. All right, so the first object we have is a grasshopper. So where on your food chain would you place the grasshopper? 1 through 5. Is either the top of the food chain or the very bottom, or somewhere in between. You pick. All right, we good? All right, let's see what we got next. Oh, now we have a snake. Making things a little bit more difficult for you, because you don't know what's next. All right, looks like everybody's good. Oh, now we have a frog. Hopefully you saved room between those two, right? Somewhere. Nope, no, don't change. Don't change. Leave them where they're at, because that'll play a little importance later. All right. Ooh, now we have an eagle. Is this making your list a little bit tougher here? You can't add like a 0, 0 to add it if you need to, or you can't add a 6. All right. Last but not least, grass. And if you looked at the bulletin, you looked at the top of the insert, you looked at the title of the message, that's probably a good clue that that was coming, right? All right, so who thinks, how's your food chain look? Anybody get it right? It's probably a mess, right? There's a few people nodding up and yes. All right, so here is the order that our students, they did really well. They did everything, but the grass came out last, so it threw everything off. But other than that, they got in the right place. And first of all, I apologize. I've been coming down with, I don't know what's going on. I have a cough, and I'm hoping this doesn't bother me today. I've been eating way too many cough drops. I don't know how many is the safe consumption to have, but I'm trying to get through today, and then we'll worry about it after that. So when we put them with these groups, I then asked the students, does society put you in groups based on the things that you like or the things that you do? Do they put you in different classifications? And they said yes, absolutely. So we named some without being rude or using slang that would upset or embarrass anybody. But we talked. We have the jocks, we have preps, we have the loners, we have artists, we have the list went on from there. And those are things that once you kind of get a band gig, the band. Kids were in there, and it's one of those things where once they get to middle school, it seems like they have to kind of start making their mind up. They can't do everything. They have to start picking and choosing some of their favorite things, and they kind of get grouped with these people throughout their walk of life. And so what does your hierarchy look like? Isn't that true with our careers when we are working? The jobs that you are at, everybody has a boss, right? You work your way up within the company, you can get higher pay or you can get higher up on the hierarchy. That's how it is with our careers. We're society today, right? kind of same thing. I asked the students, how would you, and of course they mentioned some of like the celebrities or the people with a lot of followers on their social sites because they may have more power, so we see them as people who are at the top of the hierarchy, or politicians, things like that nature, right? It's human nature for us to do that. It happens. Remember this. That's why I wanted you to put it down on your paper. We'll be talking about this, referring back to this. Also, what about your spiritual life? Do you sometimes feel like there are people who are more spiritually mature than you? Maybe they are, like maybe we see the Pope as like the eagle, right? We're trying to be as much Christ-like as we can be, so we try to work our way up. Maybe a young Christian sees himself as really immature, very new, something like a blade of grass in the grand scheme of things. We have to work our way up in our Christian faith. Do we see that? Do we do that with our spiritual walk? Yeah, we do. And we view others in these positions. It just, like I said, it's our human nature. But we're going to kind of look at some verses to kind of help us understand this hierarchy a little bit differently. First, we're going to look at, when you hear the term the gospel or the good news, what do we often think of? The Father, right? What Jesus came and did for us. And it's something that we always tell that we tell each other that we need to share with unbelievers, right? If they hear the good news, they can be saved. A lot of times, as a more mature Christian, we think, we know this stuff already. Why do we have to keep talking about the gospel? Why do we need to keep hearing the good news? Why do we need to keep talking about the story? Why do we need to remember it? You see, the gospel or the good news it's not just it's for everyone. It's not just for the unbelievers or the young Christians. Everyone can get something out of it. No matter where you think you are on that spiritual hierarchy, the gospel story can still connect to us and give us a lot of strength and power. And that's what we're going to look at in the first set of verses in Romans chapter 1, verses 11 through 17. It says, "For I want very much to see you, so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, to be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. Now, I don't want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I often planned to come to you, but was prevented until now, in order that I might have a fruitful ministry among you, just as I have had among the rest of the Gentiles. I am obligated to both Greeks and barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish. So I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and also to the Greek. For it is in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith." So we see here, one of the first things that we look at when we dive into these verses, Paul's talking to the church in Rome, and these are not unbelievers. These are not new Christians. If you look back, actually, in a couple verses before, he talks about going to all these different regions, and he's encouraged by the fact that he has heard, like, stories about their faithfulness have spread over into those regions. So this is a church that's thriving right now. This is not a bunch of immature Christians or new Christians. But yet, instead of coming to them and sharing stories that he's learned along the way, or new testimonies that he may have picked up, or new lessons that he's learned, or things that he could kind of remind this church of, instead, he goes back to preaching the gospel. He actually says he is eager to share the gospel with them, to preach the gospel with them, because he knows of the power that the gospel has and what it can do for us. So us as, someone who may have grown up in the church for a long time, why would we still want to hear the gospel? Does it not bring a sense of hope? It should help us, encourage us, get through things. The world's tough. Life is tough out there. It's easy to get put down. But when we get overwhelmed, we should always be joyful. We should always remember that the ultimate battle is won, that Christ has already won that battle. That is the uplifting, the good news, and why we should hold tight to that, why it should always impact us when we hear the gospel. You see, the gospel, it reminds us of our need for a Savior, and it motivates us to live committed to God in faith. It should help us to continue that relationship with God. And we're going to kind of look at this need for a Savior here in the next couple verses. So we're going to flip over to Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. It says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'So who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He caught a child and had him stand among them. 'Truly I tell you,' he said, 'unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.'" So, we see here that, dive into these verses once again, and the disciples come to him. And remember, the disciples have witnessed Jesus on so many different occasions, have these conversations with religious leaders and debating about heaven and the kingdom of heaven, and he keeps telling them, hey, these guys don't get it. They're missing the point. And so they kind of take this moment to say, hey, Jesus, who is the greatest? But is that really what they're asking here? No. The disciples are really asking Jesus, are we the greatest? You see, they're kind of reminding him of, hey, if these guys, these religious leaders, everybody that you keep saying is not good enough, they're not going to be the greatest, aren't going to be great in heaven, well, what about us? You see, hey, Jesus, remember that time that, we were out in the boat fishing and we were working really hard and you just yelled out to us and said, hey, follow me. So we did. We dropped our nets immediately. We left everything behind, our families, our friends, our loved ones. We just didn't even think twice. We left. We didn't look back. And don't get me wrong, Jesus, it's been great. We've learned a lot. We've seen a lot. We walk a lot, but it's been great. We travel a lot. Sometimes we're staying in people's houses we don't even know. You always provide them for us. We're not complaining, but, we're going to be the greatest, right? They're fishing for compliments here, right? They're looking to make sure that the investment that they've made here on this earth and this time with Jesus is going to be worth it. You see, the disciples, they valued their own sacrifice. They're looking at the things that, look what we did, Jesus. You see, everything that we're doing, that's going to ensure that we have a nice place in heaven, right? We're your best friends here on earth, but that's going to continue when we get there, right? They're making sure that the things that they did here on earth, they're looking at what they did, not what Jesus is about to do, not what Jesus has been teaching them. Instead, they're really concerned, they're really self-absorbed about their sacrifices. So what does Jesus do? A very Jesus thing, right? Brings a child up and explains through, he's one of the best object lesson teachers. He always just brings forward a child or does something and says, hey, this is how we do it. He brings forth a child. And he says, we are to be humble like children. And this throws them for a loop. This tosses the spiritual hierarchy that they're thinking of upside down. Because if you think about it, back then, you had the kings, the queens, then you had more of the religious leaders, then you had the men, the women, then you had the children. That would be the hierarchy if you're looking at that day and age. And even women, adult women could not own property. They had to have family to take care of them or a husband. Read Ruth, and you can read Ruth and Naomi's story, and you can see the struggle that women had even back then in the biblical days. So what about children? If women needed this to continue to have a legacy or to own property or anything like that. What about children? I was reading the commentary when I was doing this lesson for the youth, and it was really interesting because they said that the wording here for being humble was actually being dependent like a child. You see, children still need someone to look out for them, to provide them with their needs and to help them with their wants and to help them grow, help take care of them, help protect them. And isn't it the same way with us, right? We look at the spiritual hierarchy and we think, see, that's what I love about Christianity. It's nothing that we could ever do. We can't work our way up. We start out a blade of grass, we stay a blade of grass. We can't work our way up to any part of that hierarchy. Nothing that we do can accomplish that. It's not about our works, something that we could ever accomplish. We are truly dependent on what Jesus Christ came and did for us, living among us, dying on the cross for us, raising again on the third day, and offering us the grace. That is the only way that we could ever get to the kingdom of God. We have to be humble, dependent like children upon the gospel, the good news, the salvation that Christ offers us. Let's flip over to the last verse here and last couple key points. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 9 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look out not only for their own interest, but also for the interests of others. Adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. And when he had come as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on a cross. For this reason, God highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name." You see, Jesus not only taught to the disciples about being humble, but he demonstrated it. His whole life was one big demonstration of being humble. And we read that in these verses. We think about the Christmas story that's coming up here soon that we're going to be talking about. Is that not the definition of humility for a king, for the God, the creator of the earth, to come and to be born in a stable, laid in a manger? And it wasn't a big fanfare. We had a few shepherds and wise men come visit him. And that was it. And then he humbled himself to the point, and this is someone who, if we had the spiritual hierarchy, and God is an eagle, he'd be right there with God as an eagle. And instead, he chose to live his life like a blade of grass, like one of us. And he humbled himself to the point of even death on a cross. And he did that. He humbled himself to death and to cross because he knew we needed it. He knew that we were dependent like children, that you see, we had this problem Adam and Eve helped bring into the world. It's called sin. It's something that we all deal with, we all have, we all can't escape it. The only way that we can is because he saw the need to come down here and to sacrifice himself so that we could have that relationship with God again, so that we could enter into the kingdom of heaven. Because heaven's so perfect, it doesn't matter what the little sin is that may be in your life, you can't go into it. You can't, he is too holy for even that little bit of sin. And we get this confused because, like I said, we are taught that we have to work our way up. Going back to these students, and we're talking about, we teach them the American dream, right? You go to school, you work hard, you get good grades, or you're really good with your athletic sport, your athletic ability, you train really hard at it so you can get scholarships, you can go to a college, you can get whatever degree you want, and then when you get out of college, you find the job, you put your nose down, and you just work hard till you get to the top. Then you can have, all the toys you want, the cars, the house, the dog, the picket fence, you can have it all. And that's that's the American dream. That's what we always think of. And that's kind of how it's ingrained into us when we work at anything in this life, except for when it comes to our salvation, when it comes to Christianity. There's nothing that we can do. He's already done it. He already accomplished it. It's what he did for us. You see, instead of trying to do that and try to get a big head or try to work our way up and try to be better than someone else, instead we need to humble ourselves. We need to be like a blade of grass and just let God do the rest. Accept his grace and his forgiveness and be humble and work in his kingdom like he's asked us to. A few things to take away this morning. The gospel's for everyone. It's not just for young Christians, it's for mature Christians. So when you hear the gospel message, let it bring hope to your life and renew your faith. You see, and share the gospel message with those that you know that are unbelievers. If you have a hard time doing so, if you don't know the verses to look up, 3 points. It's really easy. Our problem, his solution, our response. So our problem is sin. His solution was to come, live among us, die on the cross, raise again on the third day, and offer us the grace of salvation. And then our response, when we hear this, we either accept it or we deny it. It's one of the two options. Like the disciples, we should never ask God, hey, what's heaven going to be like for me? Should I work harder to get bigger things in heaven? The next time you think you're doing better than someone else in the spiritual walk, the spiritual journey that we have together, next time we get that big head, remember what Jesus told the disciples. Hey, slow down, pump the brakes, humble yourself. It's not about you. It's about what Jesus did for us and for his grace. And the last thing, be humble, like children, like a blade of grass. Because the least of these will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And also, one other thing about this hierarchy that we did with the students, the order that they drew, I think it wasn't any coincidence. I think God really wanted to teach us, even through an illustration that I didn't even think of to rig up. I wish I would have, but I didn't. But still, we saw that hierarchy complete, except for the blades of grass on top. And at first I thought, we did this wrong. But really, if we are to humble ourselves like a blade of grass, we can be right there on top. And I just think that was a very powerful illustration that just seemed to happen. And like I said, it wasn't a coincidence. God did this. Also, if you look on the back of your insert, we have been doing staff meetings, and we do a lot of different readings out of, like Scott chose a book, I chose a book, then Amanda chose to look at kind of devotions through poetry. And this was one of the poems that she had, and just went just fit perfect with this message today. So I wanted to give you guys a copy. And for those that are watching online that didn't get a bulletin or listening on the radio, I'm going to read it here real quick. This is titled In Heaven by Stephen Crane. In heaven, some little blades of grass stood before God. What did you do? Then all save one of the little blades began eagerly to relate the merits of their lives. This one stayed a small way behind, ashamed. Presently God said, "And what did you do?" The little blade answered, "Oh, my Lord, memory is bitter to me, for if I did good deeds, I know not of them." Then God, in all his splendor, arose from his throne. "Oh, best little blades of grass," he said.